Hello again, friends, and thank you for joining me on extraordinaryconnection.org, a daily devotion website put on by volunteers from the Michigan Area United Methodist Church. My name is Pastor Scott, and I'm one of the contributors, and I have a question for you today. What do the modern artist Jackson Pollock, Yellowstone National Park, and the department store JCPenney's all have in common? They all come from the state of Wyoming, one of the least populated states, one of the largest states by size, and definitely one of the most independent states. A confusing mix, right? But that's how Wyoming's always been. Did you know at one time or another, Wyoming has been the ancestral homeland of the Sioux and Crow nations, as you would expect from a western state, but Wyoming has also been owned by the French. It's been a Spanish colony. It's been property of Mexico, and it's been part of the state of Texas. Because they've had so many cultural identities over the years, when they were formed as a United States territory in 1868, the people living in Wyoming were already a particularly independent group. So much, in fact, that Wyoming, true to its fiercely independent spirit, allowed women the right to vote in territorial elections just 1 year after becoming a territory in 1869, which means Wyoming has the distinction of being the first location inside of the United States borders to allow women to vote. Now, in 1890, Wyoming petitioned the federal government for statehood. Statehood allows representation in Congress and access to federal dollars for projects like infrastructure and civil servants. It's in a territory's best interest to become a state as soon as possible so they can access those resources. Well, if you know your U.S. history, you know that in 1890, women did not yet have the right to vote in the United States. The right for women to vote wouldn't come to the United States until 1920, some 30 years later. So in 1890, the idea of women voting was, well, let's say not well accepted. There was quite a bit of pushback at the idea of women voting in elections. I was reading some historical essays written against women having the right to vote at the time, and some of the reasons given were if women could vote, it would lead to crime. It would cause a huge spike in divorce. And it's not the duty Almighty God had created them for. So like I said, women voting at the time was not a well-accepted idea. So when Wyoming petitioned for statehood in 1890, the U.S. government said they would be fine, they could join, but before we accept you as a state in the Union, women in the state of Wyoming would have to give up the right to vote. And as you can imagine, given the sentiment at the time, it would have been an easy concession for most people to make. Women voting wasn't a popular idea. It would have been super easy for the people and leaders of Wyoming to just say, okay, let's give up women voting so we can access those resources and benefits of statehood. Politics is about compromise, both sides giving something up to meet in the middle. But Wyoming, believing so strongly they did that women should have the right to vote, being the independent people they'd always been, said no to the United States government. In fact, the leaders of Wyoming said they would rather remain a territory for 100 years than come into the Union without the women. They did what was right, even when it wasn't popular, even though it was hard, even though it would cost them prestige and resources and political connections. Wyoming stuck to their guns and they did what was right. And that's what we're called to do as Christians too. Just like Jesus' example in the wilderness when he was tempted by the devil, we are called to do what's right even when it's hard. We are told to do what's right even when it's not popular to do. And maybe, most especially, we're to do what's right when it lifts someone else up. James 4:17 says, If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. So it's pretty clear we are to do what's good even when it's not popular or easy. Right now, at recording time, we are being called to do things that aren't easy. We are being asked to not worship together on Sunday mornings inside our churches. We are asked to stay at home unless absolutely necessary. We're being asked to wear masks when we're in closed spaces to prevent COVID transmission. And we're being asked to stay 6 feet away from one another. But none of these things we're asked to do right now are easy. And none of them are fun. But I believe they are all the right thing to do. Not because they benefit me, but because they protect the vulnerable. They flatten the curve and they help slow the spread. Do I want to do them? Not particularly. But I do them precisely because I care and love for the people that they're put into place to protect. I do them because they are the right thing to do. Back to Wyoming. They stuck to their beliefs, and they were admitted as the 44th state in the United States. And do you know, they kept the right for women to vote until the rest of the United States caught up, which means in every presidential election from 1890 until 1920, men and women voted in Wyoming. Today, we have the opportunity to do what's right, just like Wyoming, to show our siblings love through compassionate acts of self-sacrifice and following the advice of scientists and our leadership by slowing the spread. But tomorrow, we will face different challenges. My prayer is we each have the courage and conviction to love our neighbors in new and creative ways, however we're called to do so, today or tomorrow. To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God, even if it's unpopular to do justice, and it's not easy to love mercy. We need to continually ask ourselves, how are we walking humbly with God every day? Know that I'm praying for all of us to have the wisdom to know right from wrong and the courage to do what's right no matter what. So God bless you, and I will see you next time on extraordinaryconnection.org.